Hello everyone. Welcome to a discussion on quantum light. This week's chapter in the Torah, every week has its corresponding chapter, is called Bahaloscha or Bahalotcha, which literally means to raise. To raise the flames. Bahaloscha Saneris, when you will raise the flames. And it's referring to a commandment to Aaron the high priest in biblical times. So we know there was a menorah, there was a candelabra that was lit every day, kindled every day in this temple, beginning from the portable sanctuary called the Mishkan that they traveled through the wilderness, and then later in the temple in Jerusalem. And there was a particular order and how this menorah was lit. And though the temple was made up of many parts, the menorah has a central role. You see, not only this chapter, but other chapters as well. You see a focus on this particular vessel, the menorah. And the obvious reason is because the idea of lighting flames and illuminating the world around us is the central purpose of life. That each of us should be a walking menorah, meaning that we're given resources and tools and blessed with different gifts and faculties, abilities, which could remain dormant in a potential state. And when you kindle and ignite your soul, which is compared to a flame, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, which is the flame of the soul of a human being, is a divine flame, we essentially illuminate and warm our environments. So that, on a very basic level, is the reason the menorah has such a central role in the Bible and also in Judaism. You see flames everywhere, basically light. You have Shabbos candles, you have holiday candles, you have Hanukkah candles. We light a flame in sad times when a soul departs, a Yizkor flame. Flames are symbolic of light and symbolic of the soul. As I've discussed many times here, the closest approximation to what a soul looks like is a flame. So it's not a surprise, therefore, that the menorah plays such a central role. So in this chapter it talks about how to kindle a menorah, but with a specific emphasis on the word Bahaloscha, to raise the flames. And Rashi, the commentary, explains why raise. What kind of word is that? You'd say kindle, ignite, light the flames. What does it mean to raise flames? And the answer is, he says, is because there was a purpose that when the high priest would light the menorah, the objective was not just he should light it, but it should make sure that it rises on its own. The expression "Ad shetehei shalheves elam elah," to the point where the flame rises on its own, and that's the emphasis on the word "rise," which technically means that when you light a flame, it takes a split second for it to catch. So you can sometimes light it and then it burns out quickly. Here the commandment was not just to light the flames, but to wait patiently for that extra second to make sure that the flame is burning on its own. You could see every time you light a flame, you could see that for the split second till it catches and then it rises on its own. And then he goes over to the next flame to light that flame. That's what Rashi says. The obvious question is, why is that so important? That the Torah sees it necessary to change a word instead of saying kindle to raise. And the answer is both simple but also very profound, and that is that the essence of all education and all inspiration, all impact that we have on others, as I said, a menorah that illuminates others, is not just to inspire somebody, but to help them rise on their own. The best sign of a good teacher is not someone who's brilliant and is able to convey great, profound ideas, but someone who's able to educate a student to become a teacher in his own. That he will not to teach methodology, not just facts and knowledge, so that the student, as the student grows, does not have to depend on the teacher to be ignited. That means a flame rising on its own. So it's a very basic lesson, which at the same time is also often neglected in our own education and how we touch others, how we're touched. There are people that force themselves, impose themselves on us. There are people who maybe educate us. But the rare few mentors are the ones that not only educate, but they empower. That you become a leader on your own, and you can stand on your own feet, and you rise on your own. And those are the best of all, greatest of all teachers. Because they teach you not to be dependent, they teach you to be independent. And that's essentially the change of the word, raise. Don't just kindle, but lift, raise them. Make sure they rise on their own. Between the Mishnah and the Pirkei Avot and the ethics of the fathers, which we study during the summer months, there's also an expression, Vehimidu tamidim harve. You shall make stand, you shall give rise to many students. Again, the focus is on making sure they stand on their own feet, not just to educate them. Okay, so that's a basic lesson, something I've elaborated on many times, and much can be said about it. But I want to take this a step further, and particularly in the context of contemporary times. So very often we look at the biblical statements as being maybe inspiring, maybe interesting to know what happened back in biblical times, but we hardly will look at biblical statements as revolutionary ideas about issues like quantum mechanics or modern science and technology. But in fact, the truth is that today when we see many of the developments in science and in modern thought, you could trace these ideas all the way back to the Bible, even though at the time they may not have been able to recognize it, but when you start studying it, you see the parallels are impossible to ignore. Especially when you have also the benefit of the mystical dimension. And hence I call this class quantum light, being at peace with paradox. The thing about light, even from the early stages, long before it became such a predominant force in physics, first Einstein and then in quantum mechanics and quantum physics, is that light is full of paradoxes. Even right here, what I've just said, in this statement here, you have Baleshches Haneris. You have, on one hand, it's the high priest that's igniting and lighting the flame. On the other hand, you're saying it should rise on its own. So which one is it? If it's to rise on its own, then we should not be dependent on anything for anyone. We should just be able to rise on our own without a mentor or a teacher. But you see with flames that on one hand, you do rise on your own, but on the other hand, you need someone to ignite you. And we see it also in our own personal lives. We all have great potential within us, but often it's locked, and we may even be blinded and not be aware of our own potential. What a good mentor does, a good educator, inspiration, a parent, if you're blessed to have one, what they do is they don't teach you something that you don't have. They teach you about something you have, and they help you access it. Like a very good coach. A good coach does not impose his or her skills on you. They help you hone your own skills and refine them and get rid of bad habits and develop yourself to the point that you can actualize with the least amount of mistakes and resistance and so on. So like a good gardener, a gardener does not create flowers. A gardener knows how to nurture and cultivate the land, make sure to get rid of the weeds, water it properly, care for it, and then the natural process of growth is expedited in order to produce beautiful plants. And the same thing is with each of us. That each of us has that angel within, but sometimes it's trapped in the marble, as Michelangelo said, and you have to carve and set her free. And that's really the challenge of life. It would be very easy if we didn't have any resistance and we just literally just experienced, you're born, come into this world, and it would be nice if also God gave us a little box that you came out with your mother's womb with a little box that said this is your mission statement, and the rest would be easy. The problem is life is a struggle, and we have to find out our destinies. We have to search, and sometimes comes at a heavy price. And we don't know our potential. Who in the world knows their full potential? As a matter of fact, the older you grow and the more experience you have, the more you realize how little you know about your own potential. So in a sense, you can say that life is like a partnership with God, where God is the investor and provides the resources, but we're the ones that have to actualize them. And to actualize them, the help of friends and mentors and people who can inspire us, what they do is, good ones, they don't, as I said, they don't impose themselves on us. What they do is they help us recognize our own inner strength. That's the greatest thing someone can do for you. To help you discover a truth you always knew was yours. Not someone gives you the truth. It's a truth that's embedded inside your DNA, inside your genes. And what a good gardener does is helps it emerge. But to do that is not easy, because you have to get rid of subjectivity, different resistances, bad habits, routines. But it's doable. So in essence, you have right there a paradox. The paradox of how much potential we have, and on the other hand, the challenges of getting it actualized. Which is why you have the two extremes that we often fall into a trap. One extreme is illusions of grandeur, where you think you're already there, where you feel, I can do anything because you recognize inside of you great potential. Or the other extreme, bouts of low self-esteem, where you feel, I'm never going to get there. And the truth, we need to have both, a combination, a balance, as the Alter Rebbe once said, that we need to know how small we are and how great we can become. In every situation, anything you learn in life, if a good education will always consist of two elements. Let's say you're starting to study art or music. Even a beginner will be shown what the great artists and the great masters have achieved. Even though you may not reach there, maybe you're definitely not there yet, it's important to have as a backdrop to juxtapose a so-called complete picture, a bigger picture. Because if you don't know what a perfect circle looks like, you'll never know what you're growing towards. You can convince yourself that I'm already halfway there and so on. So to have a backdrop of what we call an archetype, a type of quintessential state of perfection as close as possible, that's humanly possible, gives us context toward which you can grow. You say, here's the goal. Here's what some great master achieved. See if you can get close to that. On the other hand, you have to also know you have to know how great you can become. But you have to also know how small you are, where you stand. So those two elements are always pose a paradox, because we sometimes can have an imbalance in that. There's so many other areas that this paradox plays itself out. So here in this chapter, and the focus in the Torah on light is everywhere. Just to give you an example, right in the beginning of the Torah, you have, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and it says the world was covered in darkness. The earth was chaotic and confusing, and darkness enveloped everything. And then comes verse 3, and what does it say in verse 3? And God said, let there be light. So light is like, essentially, if you literally interpret it, very simple. We live in a dark world, and the mission is to bring light. As I mentioned before, to be a walking menorah, to take your talents, your skills, and instead of being a taker and a receiver, to be a giver. Instead of being influenced, to influence. Now again, this sounds like a very simple truth, but imagine you lived your life all the time that way, where you're always on the offense, where you always have what to give. How much more confident would you be about yourself? How much more secure? Now, I'm not suggesting we don't need periods where we receive. Obviously, it's a give and take, in the sense where, as I said, we'll always remain students. We're always receiving. We're always growing and becoming wiser and gaining knowledge. But there's also an element of knowing that it's not just about taking in; it's about giving out. In the temple, the windows were strange windows. Usually a window in a building, there's no windows here. But a window in a building is usually a rectangle window. You have different shaped windows. But in the temple, the windows was a shkufim atumim, which means they were like a V. But the interesting thing is, if you built a window like this, which way would you build it? Would it be the wide side on the inside or the wide side on the outside? You'd think it would be wide side on the inside, because you want to bring light in from outside. So you bring a little light, but it spreads out this way. It wouldn't make sense to build a window where the outside is wide and the inside is narrow, because then what kind of light is coming in? But that's how it was built in the temple. And the Talmud asks, why? And the answer is, because you think God needs light? God is the source of light. The temple was built in order to give off light, not to receive light, to give. So that's why the windows were built that way, because the temple was a source of spiritual light to the rest of the world. So that's why the windows are from the inside out. And if you think about it psychologically, what kind of people are we? Which way do you work? Most people, even if you don't call yourself a narcissist, but most of us, our needs come first. And needs means that the windows are the other way around. The world is, The world is your oyster. The world is at our disposal. We go out into the world and look for what can we gain, what can we receive, what can we gather, what can we acquire. When in truth, the Torah teaches us, as God gives light, you should give light. The menorah. Rise on your own, stand on your own feet, and give off your unique light to the world. And therefore the window should be the other way around. It should be not so much how much you're receiving from that which is around you, but how much you give off to which is around you. Now obviously in young age, when we're children, we receive more, we need to be taken care, nurtured and protected and educated. But the point comes when we mature. The bottom line is, in one line, is the mission of life is to be a walking menorah. That whoever you meet, and whoever you come in contact with, you illuminate and warm them. Can you say that about yourself? That today, whoever you've met, and whatever interaction you had, left warmer and more bright after you were there? If you could answer that question, yes, you're in good shape. Guarantee you, without going even further, that's the biggest sign of a healthy human being. But that's usually not the case. Usually we're busy fighting wars. We have demons that we struggle with, we have people we struggle with, we have fears, real ones, illusions. We all know all the different stuff that we struggle with. And that type of attitude where you just are a walking menorah, that wherever you go is illuminated and warmed by you, I would say that everyone has the capacity to do it, and probably it happens from time to time, but to say that on a constant basis, so there you go. We can stop the class right here. That's enough mission. We don't even have to continue. I don't even have to elaborate anymore. If we all can do that and do a little homework toward that end, you don't need to hear anything more. However, why is it not so easy? Yet another paradox. Even though it makes total sense, wouldn't it make sense just to get in touch with yourself and shine and sing your song and let the world benefit from your from the blessings that you are? Why is it not so simple? It's not simple because we, this little creature, each of us, this 5-6 foot tall person, 100 to let's say 150 pound individual, is far more complicated than it looks. We have inside of us a psyche, and we have an unconscious, and we have memories, and we have childhoods, and we have all kinds of scars and wounds that shape us, and we have stuff that we're not even aware of. So it's not just so simple, I wake up in the morning and let me just figure out how to illuminate my world. And we don't even know necessarily what our potential is like. And then we have peer pressure and social pressure, and it's hard to even identify, who am I? What is expected of me? So it's refreshing to be able to hear the Torah just cut to the chase and just say, you know what, you are a menorah. That's the bottom line. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is an accessory. So just knowing that is also, as I said, refreshing and can be helpful. But now the challenge is, and this is the big paradox, of how do we connect to it? And how can we actually feel every moment in our day that this is what I should be doing? And I'm sure I can give you excuses. You can give yourself excuses why we're not this way. We also have bills to pay, and we have responsibilities, and we have all kinds of expectations. So when you're burdened by all these challenges to survive, that just adds to the equation the difficulty of accessing and discovering what your destiny is, and definitely acting on it. So I want to talk about that some more, how we do that. And this is based on, obviously, principles in the Torah itself, but particularly as they're explained in the mystical teachings, in Kabbalah and Hasidic thought. Now some of you know, I've been lately involved in the centennial of Ayin Beis. I know this is for some a very strange term, Ayin Beis, which means 72 in Hebrew. It refers to a year, 5672, 100 years ago. This year is 5772, 1912, when a mystic of the highest order, the Rebbe Rashab, who lived then, began this epic discourse addressing exactly the question that I just posed, and many more such questions. And that is, how does one connect? How does one connect to what they're really about? And how does one get rid of the impediments and able to be that type of walking menorah, walking light? It doesn't necessarily express it quite in those terms. I'm translating it into English. But I've been teaching and learning this in the last year, but now especially it's really accelerated. Actually, every day I teach a class every morning on this, and it's posted every day on YouTube, another class. Go to ayinbeis.com, we created a website for it. And to say fascinating would be an understatement. It's absolutely brilliant material that addresses literally the most contemporary issues. And you'd be blown away by how relevant it is. However, it is written in a cryptic, mystical language that needs to be translated. But when you see it's not difficult to pick up the code, but once you do, it's unbelievable. So one of the ideas is about this issue of light. And as I said, the parallels, the psychological and philosophical and scientific parallels are also quite amazing. So without going into a long discussion on quantum mechanics, but it's become pretty much popular culture, modern physics. So let me just give you a brief overview of a few points and how it affects our life, and then I want to show you how it is literally discussed in Ayin Beis at length, based on verses in texts in earlier mystical texts, and all based on these biblical verses, including in this week's chapter about the menorah and light. They said until 100 years ago, light, even though it was a phenomenon, human beings observed sunlight, they knew it had power, but it was not really appreciated and definitely not tapped into until the discoveries of the photon and the ability to tap into these energies, Einstein's theories, and then later quantum mechanics, which changed the whole picture. But even today, if someone asks you what is light, we all know that light is a very fundamental concept. Light is considered to be, there's nothing faster than the speed of light. It's considered the edge of existence. And as I said, we're not going to go into a dense discussion on physics, but today, basically, most science that we know today would not exist were it not for the discoveries in the past 100 years. For example, the transistor, which is the essence, the core of every electronic device, and which is made up of mini-conductors, is the basis of every computer. The World Wide Web, the Internet, laser technology, anything of that nature is all built on quantum mechanics. Now, what is quantum mechanics in the brief sense of it? It's really you could say it's the DNA of the microscopic forces that shape existence. Up till around 100 years ago, Newtonian physics, Isaac Newton's physics, was the dominant way of looking at the world. It was what was called a deterministic, causal world. Everything was rules. You could predict to the second when the sun would rise. If you throw up a rock, it would fall down. The laws of nature were unwavering, predictable, deterministic, to the point as science continued to develop, and they were proven to be correct, to the point that science became so masterful of these laws that there were scientists that said at the end of the 19th century that the only thing lacking now is just more data. Once we get all the data, everything will be able to be predicted. There was a French scientist, Laplace, who wrote that give me all the data on any human being or on any phenomenon, and I can predict what that person will do to the end of time. Which of course upset very much the religious leaders, because that basically eliminated the whole concept of free will. Such absolute determinism essentially means that everything is predictable. The only reason that it's not is because we don't have all the facts. But if we knew everything, what makes you tick, and we were able to map your genome, your DNA, we could predict everything. But then everything changed in the 20th century. The discovery, through a series of discoveries, of a whole world that nobody knew was there, the invisible world of the subatomic structures. And here we suddenly discovered things that were very bizarre, and initially were rejected by every scientist because it went counterintuitive to any scientific mind. As a matter of fact, the first time these things were expressed, people thought these were people who either went over their minds or they became religious, which for many said that was synonymous. Because the statements they were making were contradictions, were paradoxes. But then it became very clear after experiment, undeniable. Even to Einstein, who till the last day rejected some of the principles of quantum mechanics, though he himself contributed to some of them, his words were, God doesn't play dice with the universe. That was his expression. Why? Because suddenly they discovered a whole world that was not deterministic. And not because lack of information, because fundamentally, what some called it was the fuzzy reality of the quantum state. They suddenly discovered a whole reality that was not determined in any way. There were things that were not predictable. Again, not because of lack of data, because fundamentally, in the essence core state of what's called the quantum state, of subatomic state of affairs, things are states of probability. Now, there are different interpretations. There's the Copenhagen interpretation, that is the most popular one today, that stands now almost over 80 years, and others. But bottom line is that it became very clear that there's a reality that is completely different than the one we're familiar with, where things are not cause and effect, where two things, Heisenberg's law of uncertainty principle it's called, states that you can never know the position and the velocity of a subatomic particle perfectly at the same time. If you know one, you can't know the other exactly. Statements like that, the observer, once you observe it, you create determinism. These are all common facts. You can go to school and Google, and you'll see it's in Wikipedia, wherever you go, will give you the basics of quantum mechanics. And one of the things that most captures the paradox, because this is a paradox, and it's very disturbing actually to a human being, because you look at a table is a table, it's not a chair. If someone were to tell you this is not a table, not a chair, and it could be either one, it immediately throws us off. Because we don't think that way. We like to think in terms of very tangible things. So quantum mechanics actually forced human beings to start thinking differently. And today it's common that invisible forces are what shape our lives. You can have 75 trillion cells in the human body. One, God forbid, mutant cell can wreak havoc. No one will blink if they hear that, because they'll say, one among 75 trillion? What's one? But we don't think anymore that way. We know it's not a numbers game. Look at a computer program, can be lines, millions of lines of computer programming. Add one dot, or take out a dot, and the program won't work. One dot. If someone says with logic, what do you mean? One dot? All the other dots are there. There are billions of dots. But that's how it works, because today it's not about size, it's about quality. And quality doesn't matter whether it's invisible. The forces that are the invisible forces, today we become accustomed to the invisible. It's still not comfortable to understand it. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists who explained quantum mechanics maybe better than almost anyone in our time, he said, the fact remains nobody understands quantum mechanics. And this is coming from one of the greatest experts. Even that statement goes counterintuitive. How can a scientist say we don't understand something that we're studying all the time? Because he's not saying that we can't manipulate and we can't build instruments based on this. It means that there's a part of it that is incomprehensible to the logical, structured mind. And knowing that humbly recognizing that is actually what makes you a better scientist. Even that's a paradox. That logic is not logical. Because who decides what logic is? Just because it makes sense that 2 + 2 is 4, who says that it has to be that way? Now, I know this doesn't necessarily immediately take you into the mystical side of things, but the parallels are impossible to ignore. When I first was exposed to some of these ideas in science, in physics, and I immediately was taken by it, because I had read exactly the same words in Eitz Chaim, which is a text of the Arizal written 500 years ago. Talk exactly about that. One of the key things in quantum mechanics, one of the key elements of it, and there's many of them, is the duality of what they call the wave-like and particle-like personality of light. What is light? Is light like a particle or like a wave? briefly, a particle is a piece of something. It's like a wave doesn't function like an object. It functions like waves. It flows like a wave. And something that is either a wave or particle means if it's one, it's not the other. A wave cannot be a particle not a wave. Yet, observation after observation came to see that sometimes when you looked at light, it looked like a particle, and sometimes like a wave. And the physicists had to conclude that a light is both, because it's not in a defined state, as I said, on the quantum state of affairs. It's in a probable state, which can be wave and particle, and depending how you measure it. Depending how it enters so-called our conscious experience, that's when it takes on the shape of one or the other. Now, this is word for word from a disagreement and discussion in Kabbalah that goes back 300-400 years ago at least, of what is the nature of light. And the Kabbalists disagree on the matter. Does light have particles, or is light like a wave? They don't use the word wave, but they use the expression, is light just a type of so-called nebulous force, or does it actually have personality? Does it have shape and form? And they discuss how light has to end up having both elements. And it's based on a text in the book of Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, with some attribute all the way back to Abraham. So now we're talking about almost 4,000 years ago, where he uses the expression Esses spheres bli ma, 10 spheres, 10 forces of energy, 10 energies, bli ma, without substance. Do you see the contradiction in that statement? If it has no substance, it has no shape and form, how could you say it's 10? But it says 10 energies without shape. Shape means it has some type of parameters. And this is a long discussion in Ayin Beis, in the chapters that we have already posted, and there are summaries of them and so on, that discusses that both are true. That there's a shapelessness, and there's also a shape. There's an element of 10 parameters, and also lack of parameters. Now, this may sound like strange. If you know some physics, you know it's not strange at all. But even if you don't, I will show you now how in our own personal lives, actually this makes a lot more sense than the world of logic. Let me ask you, is your life more logical or more paradoxical? Can you show me a person whose life is pretty much like an organized dictionary, where everything just fits in perfectly, predictable, you know exactly what's going to happen? I don't know, I've never met a person like that. Life is filled with paradoxes. One moment you're inspired, the next moment you're depressed. You know, if it's not a moment, maybe by days, by weeks, whatever. Your mind tells you one thing, tells you this is absolutely not good for you, and you end up doing it anyway. Anyone ever have this happen to them? It's been heard of around these parts, right? On this earth, that is. It happens to everybody all the time. The question is whether we do things that do make sense. That's the question. So we have this great mind that everyone talks about, the brilliant mind that the human being is blessed with. And the question I'd like to ask you all is, how many decisions that are real actually do you make based on your mind? And how many are emotional? Now, nobody likes to admit that they make decisions based on emotion, especially a smart person. But I submit that the biggest issues in your life are all based on emotion. And the mind is a tool of your emotions to help you figure out, to help justify your emotions. When it comes to issues around love, who to like, who not to like, issues around the responsibility, personal ethics, morals. I'm not talking about whether you hear the weather report that says it's going to rain, so logic tells you to take an umbrella out. Obviously, that doesn't have any real consequences in your personal life. I'm talking about personal matters. Personal matters are all emotional. Let's say all politics is local, right? All real decisions, personal matters, is local, is emotional. Now, if you're an intelligent person, hopefully you don't just go by impulse all the time. You try to gauge it, you try to measure it, you try to make informed decisions. But almost 99.9% of the mistakes that we make is due to an emotional overreaction. You know, that we often later regret. If we would always allow our minds to reflect before we act, we'd stay out of most of our troubles. The problem is, there's a thing called impulse. You see something, you want something, you desire something, you're seduced, whatever it is. It grabs your, like we say in the Shema, don't follow your eyes. because they're very powerful. You walk down the street, your eyes get attracted to something, and then you start thinking about it, and then who knows where it leads you. And I'm not necessarily even talking about destructive things and dangerous things. I'm just talking about how we react to things. We are emotional creatures that are constantly affected by our surroundings and environment. Yet we're blessed with a brain. The question is, what role does this brain really have when it comes to the most important decisions in our life, our personal decisions? So in Tanya, he puts it this way. He says that the mind is a reflective force. Emotions are impulsive. One functions like the heart, like the blood in the heart, and one like the brain, meaning that when the heart, when you're passionate about something, or your heart pumps blood, that blood also goes up to your head. So the same thing, emotions can impact our minds. Well, that's where the troubles begin. Now, if emotions and the mind were two separate entities, and you could distinguish all the time, as I said, we'd be out of most of our trouble. But it's not that way. When you get biased and you're emotionally invested, you start becoming blinded to certain things. You minimize things. You justify things. You delay them. You push them off. And so on. When you look at someone else, you'll immediately see the problem. When you look at yourself, it blinds you. Your emotions blind you. That's how it is. And that's human nature, and that's the way we were created. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when you're an adult and you choose to ignore this fact. Which is why a healthy person doesn't say, I'm not subjective. It means, I recognize I'm subjective and I try to make an allowance for that and then try to find objective advice. Which is why we consult with someone. But any matter that's truly important. The closer it is to our heart and the more we're invested in it, the less we're going to consult because we want to hear a certain answer. How many times have you asked someone advice and you didn't really want to hear the second, but you wanted to just confirm what you really want, what you knew in the first place, what you came to a decision in the first place, rather. So it's very complicated, these emotions, and this is why it's not so simple to just find our light and illuminate, because we're a jumble of feelings, and we're impacted by things. We have fears, we want to be accepted, and all this impacts how we decide things, how we maneuver, and so on. So, therefore, when you have these two forces, our lives is a paradox. However, we're not comfortable with paradox. It's what's the word? It's disorienting. When you come into a room, you like to know, here's the couch, here's the wall, here's a table, here's a bookshelf. If you see a mess, we get disoriented because we like order. And there's nothing wrong with that as well. But if you really look at life is very organized. Your life doesn't work that way. I mean, we're all here, you've all gone through adolescence. Was adolescence a very organized process? It's a whole jumble of confusing feelings. You become an adult. You don't become overnight. No one tells you all the things that you've later learned. You learn it all in the wrong way. You fall on your head, and you make mistakes, and you're delusional, and all the different things that we go through, the awkwardness of adolescence. So if you really look at life as we adjust, if we ever adjust, but if we do adjust, it's full of paradoxes all the time. So in an interesting way, actually, paradox is probably more the norm if you really want to talk about what's going on inside a human being than order. That's one point to make. So the way Ayin Beis and the way the Hasidic masters would put it is the following: that there is a reality where everything was aligned exactly with its purpose. But we don't live in such a world. We live in a world where we're not aligned with our purpose. Let me explain it in simple English. If you ask somebody, who are you? Most people give you their business card. Right? But that's not who you are, that's what you do. What you do does not necessarily reflect of who you are. As a matter of fact, in most cases, it doesn't reflect who you are. Because statistics show most people don't even like their jobs and their business cards. Now, those that have learned to like it is because they had no choice, so you learn to like it. Some people never learn to like it. And there's a few minority that you'll find that actually love what they do, and we're able to be blessed to do exactly what their so-called inner talents dictated. But most are not in that situation. So we live in a world of duality. You can even call it duplicity if you wish. What you see is not what you get. You meet somebody, you never know who that person really is. Sometimes you yourself don't even know who you really are. Well, depends on the day, perhaps. But the bottom line is, we live in a world, a dichotomous world. You could say a world of a dual reality world, where there's the outer reality and there's the inner one, and they're not aligned. Which is why we have conflicts. If they were aligned, the mind and heart would be able to find a commonality. They're not aligned. We have many forces in our unconscious that remain locked. We have memories that we don't even remember. Memories from our childhood that impact us and affect how we make choices. And usually we don't even go dig until life doesn't work out well, God forbid, and then sometimes you have to dig. So there's all kinds of forces at work that are invisible, as I said, that are conflicting. In a way, you can say the goal of life is to try to align yourself, to align your outer self with your inner self. But that, again, is not a simple process, and that requires not just an alignment on one level, alignment on many levels. We're just coming from the counting of the Omer, the 49 days between Passover and Shavuos. So, as you know, that's a period of time of refinement, of refining your emotions. The book I did on the Sfiras Omer is one tool to try to achieve that. What's going on? We all have, let's say, chesed in our hearts, love. But is your love a healthy love? Do you express it in a healthy way? That's the question. So think of it like this. A newborn child, meaning each of us, when we were newborn children, born healthy child, there are healthy patterns. You look at a child, for example, breathing, you see their chest heaving up and down. They're using completely the full capacity of their lungs. At some age, as once we have inhaled enough toxins, we begin to use 80 or 90% of our lungs. Which is why when you take a deep breath in, unless you're in really very good condition, you usually will cough. Because we don't breathe, we don't use our entire lungs. And in general, what happens is the flow of blood, the entire seamlessness of a healthy newborn changes as we begin to get polluted by the world around us. What we eat, what we breathe. And of course, psychologically, the same is true. Now the thing is, we can't really interview a newborn child, and we can only do through observation. We can only observe. But the question is, how far have you wandered from the quintessential you? If hypothetically you had the healthiest parents possible, the healthiest environment possible, the healthiest education, you would be most aligned as an adult with your inner you. Problem is, that hypothetical does not exist. So just like as we grow older, we begin to, what shall we say? It's called lethargy, couch potato. So you begin to not use all your muscles. Newborn children use all their muscles. They're crawling around and exploring, and everything is an exercise that's constantly keeping them fit. But at some point, we learn to not use our muscles. We find all kinds of gadgets. We have controls. You could sit in one button place and just press buttons. What happens to your muscle? What happens to your systems? They begin to lose their dexterity and their flexibility. What does exercise do? Exercise loosens them up. Exercise works them out and tries to align them again. The same thing with an unused brain. The same thing is with an underused any other faculty. You don't use something for a while, it begins to get misaligned from the force that gives it life. Psychologically, it's exactly the same thing. Chesed is a true faculty within our soul. It's not tangible like a muscle, but it's still a tangible reality. And when you don't use it, when you don't exercise love, love begins to get distorted. If you don't give, your love is going to be impacted, and you'll find it difficult to love. You'll find it difficult to be loved. So each one of the 49 days, each of the 7 weeks, focuses on a different emotion. Basically, it's emotional exercise. It's working out your emotions and exploring, examining, and refining each of them like you would do exercise. So just like the body needs exercise, the soul also needs exercise. Different type of exercise. Exercise of the soul is through awareness, through actions, through interactions, and so on. So we have, as I said, a dual world. We have the outer and we have the inner. And as the years roll on, just like our bodies age, as they age and parts break down, God forbid, the energy that flows in them breaks down. The same is true psychologically. As years roll on and you do not develop and actualize your soul's faculties, there becomes a split between your physical reality and your soul's potential. Which is what I said earlier, to be a menorah and to illuminate means that your soul is shining through you. How many people's souls are trapped inside them? And you can't even see it. But you could see it if you look with good eyes and you have trained eyes. You can see what person's soul is alive. You can see if they have that sparkle in the eyes, if they have the adventure, if they have that type of enthusiasm. When people start becoming resigned, anxious, these are all considered maladies of the soul. Anxiety is basically a soul that is deeply hungry and thirsty. So a body that's hungry and thirsty tells you, sends one message to you and tell you, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. A soul that's hungry and thirsty makes you anxious, makes you restless, makes you somber, makes you depressed, etc., etc. These are all signs of a machine that needs fueling. And the fueling is the alignment of the purpose, as I said, to who you are and what you do. So in Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, there's a whole map of reality, of how do we align the outer reality to the inner reality. And there's layers and layers and layers of this inner reality. But the big challenge is that we are so accustomed, especially as we get used to the rules of this existence, to tangible reality, that we are not comfortable with amorphous reality. When in truth, real reality is indeterministic, not deterministic. And hence this discussion about light as being wave and particle. It comes down to this. We each have in our lives two aspects. We have things that are very defined and very tangible. You wake up in the morning, you have your regimen. You get out of bed, or let's put it, you press the snooze button. I should say. Whatever the regimen is, you exercise, you shower, you brush your teeth, you get dressed, breakfast, coffee, whatever the thing is. It's a bunch of details. And they're very defined, and they're defined to the point of routine, deterministic, and so on. But then there's a thing called transcendence. We're transcendental creatures. We're not satisfied with mere routines. Like I mentioned many times, travel up, New Yorkers don't really see animals. Besides pigeons, squirrels, cats and dogs, and a few rodents here and there. But as a hardcore New Yorker, when driving up to the upstate, I stopped at the side of the road because I saw a cow in the field. I hadn't seen a cow in many years. I saw pictures of a cow. I said, I want to observe this cow. So then I saw more cows in the field. And what struck me above all was not so much the cow, was how calm and relaxed the cow was. Not nervous, just slowly grazes on the grass, and has been doing so for who knows how long. No therapy to go, no appointments to meet, no rush hour. It's just that peace, bliss, animal bliss. And I can't say I was envious of that, but I'm sure some people are, because think about it, it's just so calm. No challenges. The cow eats, feeds its young, breeds, dies, next generation does the same thing. These cows, like all animals in the world, are not looking to improve their lives. They're not looking to build better homes. They're not buying beachfront property. They're not leasing cars. They don't have fax machines, gadgets, iPhones, this. They're not involved in IPOs and Facebooks and etc., etc. They're at peace. Completely different reality. As I said, it could be envious when you're in a position where things are really disturbed life. On the other hand, can a human being function that way? Try it out. Try spending time in a field, eating grass, and not going anywhere. See what will happen. We have a spirit that is restless. I mentioned it's a flame. Going back to fire, it's a flame. And like a flame, it's always flickering. It's always licking the air. It's looking for transcendence. is not satisfied with today. It always wants something more tomorrow. On the other hand, we have also a body that is very much like the cow. So we have a struggle between the animal soul and the divine soul. One is a restless, transcendent force, like a fire, looking for passion, looking for excitement, looking for transcendence, to transcend the boring monotony of life. And then we have the structure of our life. And this has been the struggle from the beginning of time. Can these two meet? Philosophers, from Aristotle down to the modern philosophers today, mystics, gurus, thinkers, poets, romantics, dreamers, everybody's been struggling. Can ever the twain meet? Can heaven and earth meet? Can our transcendent dimension and our structure dimension meet? And there's all kinds of opinions. It usually breaks into two schools of thought. We can break it to Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. The Eastern mystics, their primary approach, and even though there's many variations, is search for the light. Give up on the rush hour and the marketplace and the competition and all the vices and envies and pettiness of human existence, and travel up the mountain. Give up on your material pursuits and discover the soul, the spirit. Basically, transcendence should dominate and not become preoccupied with making money, with the competition, with power, influence, and so on. I'm speaking in broad strokes here. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but a broad, general terms. The other extreme is more the Western way of thinking, is work within the systems and try to do the best you can in those systems. Western philosophy in general is much more structured. It's much more like Newtonian physics. Eastern philosophy is much more like quantum mechanics. Things are paradoxes. Logic doesn't necessarily dominate. The world of emotion, the world of probability. And there have been books written about the parallels, the differences between Western and Eastern thinking. Even in Judaism, you can say that the Eastern is more like the Kabbalistic way of thinking, mystical, transcendence, and halacha, which is more the revealed part of the Torah, deals with structure. These are the laws of Shabbos. You're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And these two worlds many times clash. So here's where the Kabbalists come into the dual particle and wave properties of light. So they explain that energy is essentially the interface between the divine and the diabolical, between heaven and earth. Energy. And in order for a human being to be able to experience transcendence, at the same time to be inside of their structure, that's where we have to figure out how energy meets containers. That's the real challenge in Kabbalistic terms, energy and container. You want it in simple English, it simply means who you are and what you do. A container is what this world is made up of. It has clear, distinct identities. That's how we live in this world. Defined reality. But then, as I said, there's a transcendent dimension. So the question is, does this energy have particles or not? Is it just like a wave, which is more like transcendence, more like a field of energy, or does it have detail and structure? And the end conclusion, especially in Ayin Beis, is that it has both. And it has to have both because that's the meeting place with transcendence, where heaven meets earth, where transcendence meets structure. And in our personal lives, it means that we're able to, even within our structures, are able to transcend our structures. And that which is transcendent can manifest within the structure. And that's the most difficult thing of all. Because I'll just give you an example. The greatest mystics and thinkers, most of them in history, you do not hear about the families that they've built. Where are their families? Where's Aristotle's family? Where's Plato's family? Socrates, if they even had a family? Where are their children and their grandchildren? Because when a person is involved in heavy, high-level thinking, you could argue they have no time to diaper children. They have no time for the nuisance of daily, menial labor. But then you look at a man like Abraham, maybe the greatest philosopher of all, the pioneer, a person who understood transcendence, and yet he also understood a secret. that he would pass it on to his family and his children. And here we are, Jewish people today, as a result of that. And family became the center. How do you reconcile the two? Building a family, building a family and bringing up children is not as romantic as it looks from a distance. It's a daily struggle. You're dealing with children, you're dealing with all the challenges that children go through and so on. Yes, the big picture is beautiful. And there's much love and so on. But it's not easy. For a big philosopher, it's much easier to sit over the books and write and teach and argue and debate and so on. But Abraham mastered the paradox. And the expression goes, with a head deep in the clouds, but his feet firmly planted on the ground. How can you master such a paradox? And the answer is because the energy is both wave and particle. Transcendence is not just pure transcendence, and containers are not just pure identity. There's something about the structure of existence that has something that is indeterministic, and there's something about indeterminism that connects to determinism. And that's the real challenge, and that is not a simple matter. Now, the root of all of this is the fact that the divine essence is neither wave nor particle. This physics has not yet reached a place where is beyond wave and particle. It reached a place where there's a probability one way or the other. So, in the context of things, basically, the parallel of wave-particle duality, which is a fundamental part of quantum mechanics, is really, in essence, written explicitly in Eitz Chaim and in other Kabbalistic works, and in Ayin Beis, which was interestingly written and delivered in 1912. 1912, the first few decades of the 20th century, was when quantum mechanics was emerging. So it's almost impossible not to deny the similarities here. The only thing is, Ayin Beis doesn't speak on the level of physics. It doesn't do it through experiments. It doesn't do it through instruments and mathematical equations. And also doesn't create applications that we have today, like the transistor or other or microchips and stuff like that are based on quantum rules or quantum non-rules, whatever you want to call it. So, but the fact is, Ayin Beis preoccupies himself mostly with the psychological and the personal implications, which science does not. So think about that. This whole wave and particle elements of light. You ask a physicist to say, is there any parallels to our personal lives? They don't speak about that. Ayin Beis speaks specifically about that. That in our own lives, we also have these two. We have a wave part of our lives, and we have the particle. A good example would be that neuroscientist talk that she gave in TED conference. What was her name? You can look it up. Where she was a neuroscientist. She became a neuroscientist because her brother suffered from schizophrenia, so that's why she went into that field. And then, as luck would have it, she suffered a stroke. And she speaks about this experience. It's fascinating talk, and it's exactly what I'm describing here, purely in scientific terms. She says that her stroke that affected her left side of her brain. And generally speaking, the right side of the brain and the left side work together. But they do have completely different functions. The right side of the brain, we'll call it chesed, sees everything as a field of energy. These are her words. Which means there's no such thing as particles. You see human beings in a room, you see how they're connected. The left brain, gvura, separates and sees pieces. So think of it like, let's say you see a beam of very powerful light shining in front of you. The light is so powerful that even though you can maybe detect images that the light is covering over, but you really can't see them well because the light is all within the light beam. But if you lower the light, or you dim the light, you'll suddenly see these images emerge. So, the way, especially according to string theory in physics, everything in this universe is connected. Everything. Not on the physical level. This table here is not connected to this table, but on the subatomic level, they all can sense each other, even if they're billions of miles apart. So one of the theories is, what is string theory? That there's invisible strings like an invisible quilt. Think of it like an invisible blanket that all the particles, everything that exists in this world, all rest upon. So imagine we were all resting on an invisible blanket, which means if the blanket moves under me, it moves under you. But we can only see the distinctions between us. We don't see the connection. This is, as I said, physics explains it this way. And she explained that when she was suffering the stroke, and it didn't happen in a minute, and slowly she was documenting and observing. She said, I wanted to brush my teeth. She uses that example. But I couldn't bring my hand to take the toothbrush because only the left recognizes distinctions. My right mind all saw it as one. I didn't even know how to move my hand. In other words, I saw everything as all melting into one, which means you can't function in this world without the left brain. On the other hand, without the right brain, you don't see connections between anything in this world. Now, in a healthy person, these two are all meshed together like in a snowball effect. So we make connections. Mostly we see is separation and fragmentation, but we're able to make connections. What the mystics say is that the connections are the reality, and it's the fragmentation that is our blindness. We're unable to see the quilt, the blanket that connects us all. But if you saw the blanket, it would eliminate and not allow you to be an individual. How could you be an individual in the face of a light, a field of energy that connects everything? That's the challenge. So that's why it's so critical to explain how energy itself has both particle and wave. So therefore, that ultimately reconciles between these two possibilities, that you can be an individual and at the same time experience transcendence. Examples abound. Take the human body as one example. Our human body, what would you call yourself? A composite of parts, a sum of the parts, or one unified entity? So, God forbid that you're a composite of parts. A healthy human being is one unified entity. You don't see yourself as a bundle of bones and veins and arteries and muscles and nerves and eyes and ears and all the stuff. You're one entity that has a bunch of components. Are you a field of energy or you are details? You're a field of energy that has details, and thank God they're working together. If for any moment those details would cease knowing that they're part of one field of energy, we'd have what's called illness. That's why when someone says, close your eyes and you don't think about your own body, what do you feel? A healthy person doesn't feel anything. You just feel that you're there. You just exist. If someone says, what does health feel like? And you have a description, it's usually not a good sign. If it feels like something. It's so seamless that it just flows through all of you. But some outsider, one second, you have legs, and you have arms, and you have a torso, and you have a head, and you have a body, and you have this and this and that. You have parts. But you're more than the sum of the parts. What is this unity? Not that easy to relate to, but it's right in front of us all the time. Take a musical composition. Is it a bunch of particles, or is it a wave? So if you don't listen to the music, and you just saw musical notes on a page, it's a bunch of particles. But when you listen to it, it's a wave. You don't hear a song. As a matter of fact, if it's a broken record or there's some abrupt thing in the thing, it'll disturb you. A song is like a flow. It's like a wave. It flows. It's like going underwater. You're just flowing, swimming in the water. That's what a wave feels like. Particles feel like pieces, composites. So the challenge is, how can we live in a world of particles and connect it to a wave? And the answer is because energy itself is both wave and particle. This answer is given not by physicists and not by Einstein. This goes back hundreds of years. Ayin Beis elaborates upon it. Literally, I'm studying these chapters now, so I see it chapter after chapter in such thorough detail. It's unbelievable. Literally keeps going back and forth. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? Is it structure? Is it beyond structure? Until it comes to the understanding. I mean, I'm not even giving you the whole thing of it, just giving you a taste of it. But it comes down to that there is a fundamental paradox, but paradox is completely fine. That's life, my friends. We are paradox. We are walking paradox. Are you made up of pieces or are you one entity? What's the answer to that? You can't even answer. It's both. The answer is both. One entity that has pieces in it. But take away the pieces, then the oneness is gone. If it's only one and there's no pieces, it's also not good. So it's a constant mix, a constant dance between the two. So to go back to light, if you think about it that way, then all the paradoxes of life, the one I mentioned before in this week's chapter. You shall kindle, you shall raise the flames. Each one of us has a soul within us that is a transcendent force, but it's concealed. And we live in a world of particles. We live in a world of details. Ask yourself, what consumes your life? The details or the big picture? We don't see the forest for the trees. It's very hard to do that. Because you wake up in the morning, and you got to go to work, or you have other responsibilities. It's the details that take over your life. And then what happens, as the poets of our time say, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And life rolls on, and details. And they become overwhelming. They become fragmented. And that mission statement, the hub that connects all these details, gets lost. And we start wondering, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing? What are all these details for? If you're not wondering, it's usually not a good sign. It means that you're so consumed you're not even thinking about it. So wondering, what is going on? What is my field of energy? What should I be doing with my life? Should the details be controlling your field of energy, or should your field of energy be controlling your details? Should your mission, who's the captain of the ship here? Who's running your life? The expectations everyone has of you, the responsibilities, the details, or why you're here, your higher purpose. This is the ultimate paradox. So we're told, become a flame, become a light. And a light has both dimensions. A light has a dimension of transcendence, but it also has a form of particles. So there's the light of Chachma, and there's the light of Chesed, there's the energy. And the challenge is to figure out how to balance these two. So what's most powerful and most tremendous here is that these concepts in physics actually have psychological and practical implications in our own lives. And that's what I believe is the real unified field theory, where we can connect laws of science to our personal lives. They're literally the same thing. Because we too have these two elements. And you can identify the wave part of your life and the particle part of your life. And both are necessary in the equation of what light is, and how the light enters into the containers, or how our souls enter into our bodies. So, in practical terms, it really means that we have an obligation, which is why when we wake up in the morning, we say Moda'ani. We say Moda'ani is a prayer that basically is a transcendent prayer. It focuses in what is. Thank you for returning my soul to me. Your soul is a very all-inclusive force. It encompasses everything about you. So before you get involved in the details of your day, focus in on that field of energy, so to speak. And the same thing at the end of the day. Before you go to sleep, instead of focusing on all the troubles and the details that happened that day, to focus in on the big picture. So if you want to get control over your life, you have to get control of the wave versus particle. If you don't, you will be trapped in that reality. So one of the maybe the lessons of why in the beginning of the 20th century the discoveries of quantum mechanics began to emerge, because maybe God saw how difficult life would become with the modern world. So He gave us a lesson. He says, you know what? I'll give you a glimpse into a reality that is not what you're accustomed to seeing. Your world is Newtonian physics. You think everything is a structure. I'll show you a world that's beyond structure. So it's really giving us a taste of transcendence. That's really what it is. So understanding that really the indeterministic world of quantum reality is really understanding what transcendence is like. Transcendence is not shaped by details. But that alone is not enough. And this is where the big dilemma that physicists have not yet come to resolve. How can you reconcile between the macrocosmic world, which is so much governed by Newtonian rules that are very defined and deterministic, with a world, the microscopic world, macrocosmic world, that is indeterministic? Nobody really understands how it travels from here to there. And clearly, there it's deterministic, and here it's not. How can that be? There was, I think around 10 years ago, a book was published. It was called "The Most Reliable Machine on Earth is Built on Indeterminism." If you want a paradox. The computer, where you could put in data and get a reliable, guaranteed result, always the same one, is built on the laws of uncertainty, where you never know what the result will be. Explain that one. How could something so indeterministic shape something that is so deterministic? And I don't remember what the conclusion in that book was. I don't know if he even answers the question. But in Hasidic thought, in Ayin Beis, he answers the question. He answers the question is because the same God that is neither defined by determinism, but by indeterminism, created both. And therefore there is a way that these two can be bridged. Now that's itself, that also is a mouthful, because it's hard enough to imagine indeterminism. Imagine that which is beyond indeterminism. How do you explain that one? That's neither deterministic nor non-deterministic. So I'm not going to go there. That's for an advanced discussion. That's not for tonight. But what I will say is, to bring it back, this I hope I didn't go too abstract here, but to bring it back to a little grounded to our personal lives, the fascinating thing is that Jewish mysticism, what distinguishes it from other schools of mysticism, is that through a single act, you can reach more higher than through meditation. You know why? Because the determinism of an act, maisa, of a mitzvah, the determinism of a particular mitzvah, creates an ability to reach a state that is beyond transcendence. And the ultimate transcendence is to transcend transcendence, which means to combine both worlds. As I said before, it's on one hand to climb the mountain and go into the light, relatively is the easier option, because you don't have to then deal with the structure of existence. In other words, to go into the right brain without a left brain, essentially. But that was not the purpose of why we were put in this earth. We were put on an earth which is governed by rules, and there's a structure, and we're all defined by that structure. We have to eat and sleep, and we have all kinds of details. So then what option do we have? To escape the details? That's not an option. To get immersed in the details and consumed by them, it's also not an option. That's why the only option is to spiritualize the material. To teach the deterministic world something about indeterminism, and to teach indeterminism to be harnessed by the structures. That's ultimate Judaism, if you want to put it in a nutshell, in mystical terms. It's bridging particles and waves. It's bridging structure with beyond structure. And each one becomes richer. Is that the rain? Oh. And each one becomes richer in the process. They both teach one of the other. Now, I have not yet, I know that there's some physicists watching this class because some wrote to me. I've not seen in any physics yet anyone that's seen how each informs the other, because, as I said, it's a paradox. This paradox has not been resolved, and I suggest it will never be resolved, because they are two different worlds, and they both need each other. So, in Ayin Beis and in other Hasidic texts, it talks about how the limited structure of our existence can release the greatest passions of transcendence, and how transcendence, in turn, releases unbelievable power within our structures. So it's really about learning how to build a model that parallels our own bodies. As I said, our body, which is a reflection of the universe, is a perfect example of symmetry, of harmony within diversity. It's as diverse as it gets, but it's as harmonious as it gets. How do you explain that? It doesn't make sense purely from a logical point of view, because, as I said, you take a bunch of details, millions of them, how could they all work as one machine? And the same, as I said, the example with music. You take musical notes, and it's one flow, one wave of music, not a sum of the parts. There's some type of synergy that's more than the sum that emerges from from these details. So that's the challenge. How do we firstly find the fragments, firstly get beyond the fragments of our own lives and find that type of synergy? And then how do we connect to each other that way? In a way, you could say this is the mystery of love. This is the mystery of romance. This is the mystery of how two human beings who are diverse, two particles, become one wave. How can that be possible? The only answer is because they have souls. They're not just distinct. They're not just distinct individuals, each with their own way of thinking and their own feelings and their own personalities and their own individuality. There's something also that is like a field of energy that connects the two. And they connect them not just on a body level, not just on a soul level, but on all levels. Even on levels of unconscious. Even the levels of the unconscious are connected. One of the examples that I would use for it is, each of us has a measure of creativity, whether it's creativity through art, or music, or creativity through business, and another. I think that we envision some type of something or other, and then we bring it into action. So let's just use the example of a composer or an artist. Okay? So an artist, before he or she has a vision, they want to create a beautiful painting or a beautiful composition of music. So this artist has a personality. If you're able to go into the unconscious mind and heart of this artist, there's a state where nothing has yet become defined by any vision. And then one fine morning, this artist thinks of an idea. I want to create a mural. I want to paint a beautiful horizon, or a beautiful image of whatever it may be, and express a certain sentiment. Now, all this, mind you, is all working in the mind of the artist, and he or she begins developing it to the point where it's ready to take the instruments, a palette, a canvas, and begins to paint. You walk into the room as another person and you see the painting emerge slowly. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, weeks, months. And suddenly one day you come, you see what's beautiful painting. The beautiful painting is the final product of a vision that the artist had months or maybe years ago. So here's this analogy. What's the relationship between the painting, the artist, and you as the observer? So, from the artist's perspective, everything started from the top down. First, there was an artist. He had many visions. Then he chose to manifest one vision and paint it piece by piece. When he sees the pieces, he sees the whole picture within it. You, the stranger or the observer that comes in and watches it, you build it from the bottom up, not from the top down. Piece by piece by piece. You look at one part of the picture, another. Now I see the whole picture. So now I'm starting to get a glimpse of what the vision of this artist was like. But are you getting also a glimpse of what the artist is like? Remember, the artist is more than the sum of the parts of his visions. Now this is an example for each of us, by the way. And it's also an example for God. But let me finish the example. So slowly, if you as you explore and you go on this journey, you're slowly beginning to see from the vision, you begin to understand something of the artist, until you start realizing that this artist has a lot more visions, and a lot more than just this one piece of art. This is an example of how we experience, how we travel from the bottom up. We're born into this world, we're thrust into a strange, dark world. And then we suddenly grow up and we become aware of our reality, of our existence, and we start wondering, why am I here? You look at the painting of your life. You look at the painting of the world. And you just look, here's a piece, here's a piece. You say, this teaches me there must be something more. At some point you come to discover there's a vision here. Something with a vision that has put all of this here. And then you can realize that the thing that has this vision has a lot more than just a vision. It's essentially like building stepping stones that help us go from one perspective to another. So we meet each other. Two of us meet each other. I look at your face, you look at my face. We have a conversation. What is really going on? So we all know initial conversation or initial body language or look is just a superficial part of who you are. You're showing me part of yourself. I'm showing you part of myself. Two people get to know each other more, especially someone who's trained. Start realizing, 1 second, whatever I see, there's a million more layers beneath the surface. There's a whole psyche at work. There's a whole personality. People who really get to know each other and become close realize that the dimensions that are within are far more complicated and far less deterministic than what you see. What you see is just particles. Internally is the whole wave of personality. When you know somebody, you don't just say, I know 3 parts of that person. You know the whole person. Doesn't mean you know all of them, but you know them as an entirety. You call them by a name, but that name means right away, it conjures up a whole life experience with that person, especially if it's someone you've known for a long time. So who's the real person? Obviously that inner one. So this relationship that two people have, do we have artificial, superficial relationships, or do we actually connect on a deeper level? So I'd like to believe that our goal would be, and I try to make this my goal, that when I connect with somebody, I'm looking to connect soul to soul, heart to heart. I'm not interested in having a superficial relationship. Obviously we all have certain superficial relationships in our lives. The things, you go into a grocery store, you go into things, you don't have to start having a soul-to-soul connection with everybody. But even that, frankly, from a Torah point of view, maybe that also should be a soul-to-soul connection, but I'm not talking about it in a corny way. A walking menorah doesn't mean that you go over to everybody and say, hey, I want to illuminate you and warm your life. That's not exactly going to necessarily be taken so easily. It means that you do so by who you are. You give off a positive energy. But the connection that's happening is, you're looking at a world that is so structured, but you're really trying to pierce the structure. What is love if not that? It's not just two people who touch or connect on a purely external level. It's two people who connect on an internal level, and the outer is just simply we'll call it a calling card. It's like it's like a label. It's the doorway. You enter through the outer chamber, but you're entering into the inner sanctum. And that's what a relationship is about. That's what connections are about. And the question is, can these two things be bridged? Can we live on the outer level and connect to the inner, and can it travel back and forth and back and forth? And obviously the answer is absolutely yes. Because you could argue, spiritual energy is spiritual energy. Why light a menorah in the first place? Why do you have to physically light a menorah? Just teach us how to give off light. No, but the Torah says, no, I want you to take a physical menorah made out of gold, and it has 7 branches, and you put oil in there, pure oil, and someone goes and lights it. I want to see a physical manifestation of light. As much as no matter how light is, how abstract light is, and how amorphous and how nebulous, or however you want to call it, ethereal light is, it's still something we look at. And we light it Friday evening, and for holidays, and Hanukkah, and other times of the year. So you have a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. That's the objective. Not just to have a spiritual meditation on light, but to actually have a physical light and connect the physical with the spiritual. And that's the bridge. The bridge of the ultimate paradox of bridging matter and spirit. Because at the end of the day, all of science and all of physics is about the bridge of matter and energy. And that's why there is a duality. Because matter is particle-oriented and energy is wave-oriented. But as I elaborated here, even the wave, even the energy, also has wave and particle, and even matter has an element of wave, and even energy has an element of particle. So that's how these two worlds join, fuse. And that's what's called total fusion. And in our personal lives, it's really about that. It's about looking at someone, seeing that they have defined structure, but knowing that there's a quantum psyche inside there. There's a state of being that is not defined by particular mode. That's why, people you really know well, you have no issue with them being contradictory. Because, somebody, we all got our quirks. We all do things that are somewhat nutty. And we all have contradictions. When you meet someone that you don't know, you're very disturbed. You say, 1 second, you told me this or you told me that? But the best people I know, I can't figure out what they're saying. And one day they say this, one day they say that, and I'm perfectly fine. I just smile. I say, okay, I get it, whatever. Because that's how it is. When you really let yourself completely hang loose and you have no defenses up and so on, you're just a bundle of paradoxes. That's the truth. We just have to masquerade because we may be seen as a little crazy if we said everything we felt. Am I the only one that way? Maybe. Okay. So be it. Since I'm the one that's on the block here, so I'll be totally vulnerable. That's how it is. The first book I ever wanted to write, I never ended up writing quite that title, but the title that I always liked was Speaking to Yourself. I was always fascinated by the idea, what did people say to themselves, like when they're in the shower, when nobody's around, when you start yelling at yourself or at a machine or whatever it is, you start banging, because I think that's where we really get to know the real one. If you want to know the real you, what do you say to yourself when no one else is around? And the question is whether we'll ever say it to somebody else is another story. But so I thought of writing a book like that, Speaking to Yourself, and just it would be quite funny. But I don't know. I guess, but you need to have a lot of courage to do that if you're going to be honest, because a lot of things you don't want anyone else hearing. It's sometimes embarrassing even hearing it yourself. So you ever speak to yourself? Anybody here? I don't necessarily mean with words. You do? Okay, good. It's a good sign. It means that you're alive, basically. You know. I knew a guy. Remember a guy? He's already passed away. Every time I saw him walking down the street, he would literally speak to himself. I'm talking about like argue with himself, like with his hands. He would like have this like discussion. No, you said this. I said this, like that. And I would meet him. He was not inhibited at all. I said, who are you speaking to? He says, I have two voices in me. They're constantly arguing. You know. So I said, is it resolved? He said, no, it's never going to be resolved. So I found that to be quite endearing. Now, he's not in the classification of someone you lock up, because he was pretty sane. But I guess even sanity is, who says sanity is sane, right? Who decided what's insanity anyway? Now, so to sum up, my friends, I see a whole bunch of light in this room. Everybody here is a menorah waiting to be released, or maybe you've been released already. And hopefully you could ask your friends or others and say, listen, do I bring some light and warmth into your life? I hope they're honest and they tell you yes. And they're dishonest, they'll tell you yes anyway. So you have to figure that out on your own. What can I tell you? But it's something we should look to aspire to. Because there's of course also people that always bring us, when you meet them, you always feel down. You always feel like they're bringing you some darkness. But I think we have control over this if we really want to. And obviously it requires a certain measure of inner confidence to really feel strong about being able to have the courage to give. You know, I think giving requires courage. To take, a coward can take too. Cowards don't know how to give. There's the strongest people in the world that are really strong within themselves, that know how to give and want to give and feel confident that they have much to give. There's a law in Judaism that says that everybody's obligated to give charity, even a pauper. You think, why? That sounds like a strange, why would you expect a pauper to give charity? A pauper doesn't have any money. Because it's a lesson in dignity. Everyone has something to give. We're not talking about how much, we're talking about to give. So the Mishnah says, Ezu Chacham Halayim Mikol Adam. Who is the wise person? Right, the one who learns from everyone. So you learn two things from that. That everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to teach. No one doesn't have something to teach, and no one has something, and no one cannot learn something. So it tells us that each of us have something unique to offer to others, and you have to get in touch with that. So I hope, at least, if you take away nothing else from this class, is to know that if you're a walking paradox, that's exactly the way it should be. And the thing is that paradoxes are not that shouldn't be so disturbing. That's ultimately, I think, the ultimate lesson. One of the lessons of quantum mechanics is to be at peace with paradox, but then learn to align it. When I say paradox, it doesn't mean to justify erratic behavior. That's not what I meant. I meant to say to be at peace with the fact that there are forces that are sometimes not fully understood, conflicts, and the goal, of course, is to channel them, harness them, and channel them into one place. So the parallels of quantum light, paradoxes, quantum mechanics, Ayin Beis, and everything else that comes with it. So I hope to continue to explore some of these ideas, and more importantly, I hope that it provokes you to share some of your thoughts, and maybe areas of your expertise where you can find parallels to these ideas, because I find that when we look for parallels between different schools of thought, all the schools get richer in the process, because you see dimensions. You know, there's no question when in reading some of the Kabbalistic texts, you can definitely illuminate new ideas in quantum mechanics, and vice versa. The quantum approach to things has ways of articulating and communicating ideas that on your own you wouldn't fully appreciate necessarily in mystical teachings. And ultimately it's about a confluence between quantum psychology, quantum physics, quantum spirituality, quantum cosmology, and in some way finding that unified field theory that I mentioned, which ultimately comes down to human beings being aligned with this paradox. Because if we're not aligned, if the observer is not aligned, how can you expect the thing we're observing is going to be aligned? So essentially, yes, an ethical and consistent scientist will create ethical and consistent atomic reactions. Okay, that's my concluding note. Think about it. So I want to conclude with a blessing, to bless you all to do exactly that, to be these walking menorahs, and start illuminating and warming or doing more than you've done till now. And remember, every interaction is an opportunity like that to ignite and empower. And it's an honor to light flames with all of you, each in our own way. Each of us have our unique flame, our unique song. And I want to announce that Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night, I was told. Philip Namworth gives his weekly class. And I will continue this journey next week, next Wednesday. And as I said, besides this class being broadcast live and archived, I've also now been giving a morning class every day, adding another chapter of this Ayin Beis that I'm studying. It's in text. I explain it all. Try it out. It's not light. It's not light study, but it's very gratifying. And we've also established this thing called Club 72, which always brings a smile to my face. The idea, which really is just following along this centennial as it was developed 100 years ago this week. We're sending out a weekly email. It's a free email if you sign up, which is like a summary in English of the ideas, some parallels, questions. It's an interesting, if you're looking for something interesting and unique, and I think also radically challenging and looking at ourselves in a new way, this is something that you may benefit from. So, and if you haven't left your email address, please do so. We have copies of Beyond the Letter of the Law. Yes. And I want to wish Velvel Mazel Tov. He had the bris today of his newborn son, Yisrael Aryeh Leib. Velvel is a proud father, and was going to. We know now for sure that as you age gracefully into your middle ages and old age, you'll be still walking a son to the chuppah, and who knows, right? Okay. And many more with you and Sarah should have many more children, many simchas, okay? Okay. And everybody here should only celebrate good occasions. Those that need a blessing, finding a soulmate, a shidduch, I bless you with that. That's the ultimate paradox. Kosher Kakriyas Yamsuf, is parting the sea. Soulmates coming together. And blessings for health and children or whatever else that anyone needs. And parnosa, of course. And peace of mind. Inner peace of mind, but not like the cow in the pasture, but to get combined with the restless transcendence of a human being. Thank you very much.